Everyone. Thank you so much. But now we get to the great part where we can introduce formally Dr. Robyn C. Spencer, who I had the wonderful opportunity to work with before. And just please, if you haven't read The Revolution Has Come, please, please, please purchase this and support Dr. Spencer's amazing work. So Dr. Robyn C. Spencer is a historian that focuses on Black social protests after World War II, urban and working class radicalism, and gender. Her book, The Revolution Has Come, Black Power, Gender, and the Black Panther Party in Oakland was published in 2016. She is co-founder of the Intersectional Black Panther Party History Project and has written widely on gender and Black power. Her writings have appeared in the journal Women's History and Souls, as well as the Washington Post, Vibe Magazine, Colorlines, and These Times and Truthout. She has received awards for her work from the Mellon Foundation, the American Council of Learned Societies, and the Association of Black Women Historians. She's currently in residence at the Institute of Advanced Study in the School of Social Science, finishing her second book project on Black protests against the U.S. war in Vietnam. She is also working on biographies of two radical women, Angela Davis and Patricia Robinson. Thank you so much, Dr. Spencer, for being here.
Thank you, my pleasure. It's such an honor to be asked.
Great, great, great. So we're just gonna hop right into it. So the first section really we're gonna be talking about is centering Black women's leadership in the Black Panther Party and beyond. And the first question, Dr. Spencer, I have for you is, so you do everything, right? You are a historian, you're a scholar activist, and so much more. I'm very interested why you chose history as your field. And why was it important, or why is it important for you to center Black women's activism and leadership in your work?
Thanks for asking. History kind of chose me. I was a pre-med major in college, and but I loved history from high school. And going away to college from my majority Black neighborhood in East Flatbush, Brooklyn, to the wilds of upstate New York, the racial wilds, we should say, was a real shock. And I found myself in the history classes just really trying to figure out the world. They seemed to me that those classes had a key to analyzing what was happening around me at the time. So I slowly sort of, phased away from my science classes and declared a history major. And history became my toolkit, my lens in the world. It allowed for me to think about ways to shine light on the actions of ordinary people, and especially overlooked women, Black women. And so history became my major in college and my focus in graduate study. And it really gave me a platform and a way of thinking about things that has allowed me to even, I think, continue the same sort of passion for any series of ideals or research and things like that to this day. So I feel like I'm a historian, even in other elements of my life outside of the classroom. I want to know the backstory of things. I'm curious in ways I think the historians are. And I really love kind of always having a foot in the past. And I think it provides a really interesting lens on the future and maybe some great steps to the in the present as well. Now, I think you also asked about why I centered Black women in my historical study. I centered Black women because I found them in the archives. I think I didn't go in, necessarily with a specific desire to seek Black women. Yeah, I want to say that because I'm not, my graduate training did not include a lot of coursework on women's studies or things like that. But when I went into the archives and I saw women's, hands in all elements of the Black Panther Party, and this was also at a time where I was really becoming involved with a lot of women's activism outside of the classroom, Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill, women talking back to the Million Man March and some of the misogyny that was associated with that on some levels. So I was also starting to think about like power and gender dynamics. And when I found the women in the archive, it was like an amazing revelation. So I felt like I don't have to do much to assert that these women were central. It's clear that they were central. The fact that I'm actually sitting here with this stack of papers is why they're central. They were the typists on some level. They did the clerical work alongside their male counterparts. And they were also out there, doing the public self-defense work. They were doing the intellectual work. They were doing everything that I had initially conceptualized in my mind. I was just kind of almost like a gender neutral thing. Like I was thinking about the Black Panthers and, not really even seeing clear figures. When I got into the archives, like, okay, I see that there are quite a lot of women involved, and you can't really understand this organization without the women. It wasn't that I felt like, oh, there's an absence, so I have to insert women. It was just that the way I started to think about women sort of permeated all of the questions that I had to ask for the Black Panther Party, all of the inquiries that I wanted to know about, all of the paths that I took after that. So I think that's important to note, because oftentimes women are hidden in plain sight. They are there, we are there, but it's the way we look at history that takes women out.
Thank you so much, Dr. Spencer. And Luc?
Yeah, so Dr. Spencer, I love everything that you said, and just reading the book in itself, I mean, it was, to me, it always made sense that women were obviously clearly involved and played such a vital role. But one thing in the book that I didn't realize was how it changed the vision of the Black Panther parties when women started getting into it, initially starting with primarily men. So I guess the question I have for you in regards to the book is, what initially drew you to write The Revolution Has Come in the first place? And why was it critical for you to ensure there was a gendered and intersectional analysis of the Black Panther Party? Because, Black women don't get enough credit for a lot of the movements that they help lead and push and foster. So that'd be my question for you.
Definitely. And it's a university of the streets kind of answer. I mean, there was the university in that I learned about the Black Panthers in a college classroom in a really in-depth way. I'd heard about them growing up, but I didn't have a real in-depth sense of like what they were doing. And I took a class where I happened to be assigned the autobiography of Assata Shakur. And that book was so transformative to me. I couldn't put it down. It's incredible. Just the writing alone, it's such a great read. I couldn't put it down. And she was talking about my world. She's in New York. She's, back and forth to the South, but she's, also a lot of it is occurring in New York. And it talks about how she goes from someone that's apathetic to someone who is active. And that was oftentimes missing. Sometimes it felt like you didn't quite know how the people, what sort of analytical shifts or even personal choices it took to get someone from point A to point B. Because I was asking myself those questions. I saw lots of things going on, around me in the 1990s, police brutality cases, anti-apartheid movement, everything. But I didn't know how to go from, someone who is critical of that to actually like putting my body, my voice out there. And when I read about Assata, it was really inspirational because that's exactly what she did. She went from, watching the news and kind of believing everything to joining with some people that she met in her college setting and then becoming active in her larger community and to actually being a voice. And I think that was important to me as well, because it felt like she was laying a path out. And after reading that book, I was really intrigued and I started just reading like Black Panther, Black Power autobiographies. And then I came to the end of that journey in those days before Google, before the, the possibilities of endless study and research, as so it seems. I came to the end of the path and I was like, wow, I would love to take all of these individual stories of people and think about how they can come together in a larger narrative. And so I basically went to graduate school with the intention to write that kind of book. And I have to say that it was when I went into the archives, because in a lot of ways it's kind of, you're training as a graduate student, you write this proposal, then when you get out there again, you may find things that surprise you. And so I found things in the archive that surprised me. And at the same time, University of the Streets in New York, there was a big upsurgence in sort of Black Power type activism. There was the Black Panther Collective that veteran Panthers had started to mentor young people and to share an accurate view of their history, and the local Panther chapter in New York, as well as the nationwide context and even the international context. And so I got involved in that. So I feel like I was seeing the Black Panthers like in my community and shouting out to Medgar Evers College, a community college at that time where there was a lot of interface between the community and the campus, and that you could, as a regular person who wasn't, necessarily seeing yourself as like some kind of great scholar, you could go into those classrooms and realize that you are a great scholar actually, and you do belong there, and you can read these books and learn more. So I went to many, many free community type events at Medgar Evers College. I was part of the Center for Women's Development, and it really helped me to kind of connect what was happening in my reading and in my graduate work with a sense of relevance with the larger community. In fact, I remember just, being at my computer during like really key moments of turmoil that were going on. I'm thinking, like Rodney King and how traumatic. I think now these things are so unfortunately normalized, but the televised, account of testimony, we can even call it, of Rodney King's, vicious beating, that changed me forever. And so writing became a way of activism as well. It's like people need to know, and they need to know that when they're envisioning like these revolutionary movements and things like that, it's women who are there in the forefront, who are leaders. Just the way when I went to the community that I saw lots of women who were involved in that.
Yeah, and we kind of see that still to this day. It's women holding it down for real.
Yes.
I appreciate that feedback, Dr. Spencer. That was very enlightening and informative. Yeah, because I was just wondering like how you went about even being passionate to write this. But I'll pass it to Karla for her to ask a question that she'd like.
Definitely, and thanks for asking. I think it's an important question because, like I said, there was the sense almost, because I teach about like the Emmett Till and these, horrible moments, Scottsboro, these horrible moments of, violence and people's response and how it just changes their life. And I feel like I had those experiences. And as people today can say that they've had experiences that have changed their life, the path of their life, and that they now are going to be agents for change.
Right, for sure. Karla, you want to ask your question?
Yeah, so you've mentioned this already about your research, but can you give us a little bit more of background on conducting your research for the book? And was there like an interesting archive or interview or information that you came across in regards to Black women's leadership in the Black Panther Party?
Definitely. Thanks for asking that, because the archives are so important, oftentimes overlooked, but we work in the archives, we create archives, we preserve archives, we use archives to tell movement stories. So when I got into the Panther archives and started to talk to people, oral histories as well. One of the things that surprised me was how organized the Black Panther Party was. I think that sometimes we imagine, you know, I don't know what we imagine, but I was certainly not thinking about like rules and work, you know, little, you know, blank, fill in the blank papers, the work reports and daily work reports and officer of the day and, you know, memos and letterhead and minutes from meetings and memos. And like, that was not my vision of the Black Panther Party when I was thinking about it. I didn't
so it's like
find like thousands of pages of that stuff there, but you know, it made me realize that, yeah, they were organized, just like, you know, so many other organizations at the time that we still don't fully, you know, acknowledge, like, you know, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. I mean, they had a research department, for example. And so for the Panthers, their ability to sort of chronicle their own history, everything from the photographs that they took of themselves in joyful moments, not just the military stance of opposition to state power or anything like that, but the photos that reflected humor and family and their tenderness with children and fashion. I love seeing all of those things in the archives. And again, I didn't expect it. Even me, who was going there with such an open mind, I didn't expect to find all of that kind of material. So there was one day when I found this memo talking about the children of the Black Panther Party. And it was a line in there that said something like, "We are all their parents." And it was just talking about like how the organization was going to take care of the children of the members. They were going to make sure that the members were still able to have full political lives while knowing that their children were being taken care of. And I, you know, that was a moment for me because I traced it back to just thinking about just the influence of women and their demands that they made of the organization around children and childcare and those kinds of things with their male allies. So it's really, really, I think, important to note that the Panthers were caretakers in that way and that they sought to make those kinds of political connections, right? That, you know, and I always tell my students, because it's hard to figure out today, like, what did it even mean to be a part of the Black Panther Party? Like, where did you go? What did you do every day? Who fed you? Where'd you get money from? Like, those are questions I had, like real practical questions. Like, what did it mean to be part of this group? And the papers that I found helped me to explain that. Like, okay, there were rules and there were activities and there, you know, people were assigned to different tasks. And, you know, this was different in different parts of the country, but my particular book focuses on Oakland. And it was a real rich experience to kind of dig into those papers and have evidence for such a rich organizational life, especially when the Panthers had been sullied by for so long as being, you know, machoistic and dysfunctional. And it's not to say that they were, you know, that they didn't have their flaws either, but no one, I think, really had brought out how they lived and how they tried to live in a way that was political. You know, they tried, they failed, they struggled, and there's something beautiful in the struggle, even if they weren't fully successful.
Thank you. Thank you for answering that.
And I love how you give like a humanistic approach in your book about the Panthers, because oftentimes I think we romanticize the Black Panther Party and don't see how, like you said, how these were they are people. These were people, and often many of them are still political prisoners, right? And amongst all sorts of things and what they went through. And so thank you for giving that perspective as well. And so my question for you, going back to Black women, because, you know, we always have to talk about Black women, but in what ways do you see Black women continuing the leadership for Black liberation?
Well, today I see Black women at the forefront in so many different spheres. And I think the Panthers helps us to rethink like even what we think of leadership, how we define leadership, away from the person with the microphone to the person doing the work behind the scenes. So we see Panther women, and I want to say first, as intellectuals, as thinkers, as people who drew from the radical ideals in circulation at the time from Fanon and Fidel Castro and Mao Zedong and Samora Machel, and from, you know, from everywhere. They drew from so many sort of revolutions, and they aimed to use those ideas as weapons for Black liberation in the US. And how those women did that, how they thought, what they read, how they spoke to each other, that intellectual history is really, really important. It's oftentimes absent. When we think about the Panthers, you know, sometimes we start with the doing. They did this, they had their breakfast programs, they had their community programs, certainly they marched. But I think it's also important to think about how they shifted the intellectual paradigm, how they took ideas of political radicalism and they made it accessible to the person on the street corner. And that is so key. That is so key because important to highlight, you know, an effort like Abantu audio around audiobooks, right? The Panthers read, right? They read a lot of materials from Frantz Fanon, from the Red Book, to you know, lots and lots of political thinkers, Lenin, CLR James, and they produced a lot of writings based on that. And so I love to highlight how Panther women produced those intellectual tracks, who wrote things that can be used critically as fuel for today's activists who are on the front line. So definitely the Panther women as thinkers, and then Black women today as thinkers in the movement, thinking about things like prison abolition, carceral state. It's Black women thinkers who have been at the forefront of defining those concepts and popularizing them. So yeah, thinkers. So of course, activists, women involved in the Black Panther Party did a lot of political work. Oftentimes, you know, I want to say, you know, uncompensated or like volunteer, because that's the framework we have for it. But it was the political work that was part of their movements, and they made tremendous sacrifices to continue to do that work. And so it's no surprise that they made demands on the organization to make that work more possible. So things like staffing and organizing, like the health clinics, which could mean everything like coordinating the medical teams and things like that. I mean, it was important for me to know that that's what it meant to be part of the Black Panther Party, that you might, you know, spend days, you know, rounding up or coordinating or building out a community program for sickle cell anemia, for example. And that was a radical act, right? That was a call for a certain type of healthcare that brought the idea of socialism to the people in a way that was different from saying, here, read this tract. Although when you went down and you had your sickle cell test and when you attended their events, you certainly got also that political foundation as well. So they really were translators. And Black women in the Black Panther Party did, you know, a great job of making those translations between the theoretical and the practical. Like, what did this mean to someone's material conditions? That's what drew me to the Panthers in the first place. I felt like they were very, very strong in their approach to the ordinary person, right? They had a really strong class analysis, and they centered education in ways that I think that we haven't even grappled with. And I think Black women doing that. I mean, Black women on Twitter and you know what Jaimee is doing. It's all in the same sort of tradition.
Thank you, Dr. Spencer. I'm over here like writing all your quotables.
Yes,
I
Dr.
just posted
Swift, I
something.
should say.
I feel like the cat meme right now. But I'm literally just like quoting you on Twitter because I'm like, everything you're saying is so on point. So thank you so much, Dr. Spencer. It's always a treat to hear your thoughts and your mind. So I appreciate it. And Luc, I'm gonna pass it over to you.
Yeah, this is very enlightening, and I'm trying to stick to the schedule because as you're talking, I'm like, dang, I got questions. I might have to be one of the audience members and ask some questions during that time.
Yes, let's just deviate from the script. Okay, we can do it.
Right. But so want to move into like internationalist politics. Obviously keeping up with the archives and moving towards the future of what Black Power looks like. So one of the core commitments to the Black Panther Party was internationalism. They had chapters internationally. They studied these international theories of socialism and whatnot. So currently we're seeing calls for solidarity around the world. Obviously Haiti, going through what it's going through, my family down there, Kashmir, Ghana, Ethiopia, Cuba, and we have so many other examples that we could show where I think there's some solidarity that can be had. So for you, do you mind sharing more about the Black Panthers' international politics and also how Black women in the party spearheaded that global national initiative? Elaine Cleaver, I'm sure, is the main source of that, but so many others. So I'll leave the floor to you.
Definitely. It's a great story to tell, and we could tell it in like such granular ways. So solidarity, I think, back to being a historian, solidarity, the term as we use it today has a certain resonance. And so when I think about like what was going on in the 60s, it's what we would call solidarity today, but it has this different definition. So if you think about like what did the people in the Black Panther Party do to sort of express their political interconnections with the fate of people around the world who were fighting colonialism and imperialism, they did everything from use their newspaper to educate their readership. So they created an international page in the newspaper, which had international news. They also sometimes printed some of the paper in Spanish. So that broadened their audience, because I think that's something that we don't think enough about when we talk about internationalism. English is not, a very, it's compared to many other languages around the world, it's a pretty, it's not as widely spoken as other languages. So the Panthers definitely dabbled in that. Like Kathleen Cleaver, for example, used her French knowledge to help the Panthers when they found themselves in particular context, whether that be in Europe, in Algeria, or in Central Africa, right? So language, I think they definitely have that legacy. And I think that's something we have to, there's one thing to say, I'm an internationalist, but how international can you be if you're in one, in one language? So thinking about those questions. The Panthers also read internationally. So they read the work of international theorists. They disseminated that work as well. And they also, what today we would call signal boosting. They raise awareness of the anti-imperialist struggles that were going on around the world, in Latin America and in Africa at the time, and in Southeast Asia, in Vietnam. And they made those struggles inextricable from what was happening in the US. And they did it in a way that didn't say, sort of, we have the same oppressor, so we should be united. They talked also about shared histories. They made political connections with organizations on the ground. So they were supporters of anti-apartheid organizations in South Africa. They shared material support as well. And of course, they traveled. The ability to leave and to go into the world, sometimes pushed out of the world because of the political repression they were facing in the US. They went into the world sometimes to seek alliances. At other times, they went into the world to participate in global conferences where people came together and strategized and also built the material connections that allowed people to see that their fates were interlinked. And they did all of that. Panther women were at the forefront of that. I can think about one particular woman I'll talk about whose legacy is thriving in Tanzania. So I'm going to talk about Charlotte Hill O'Neill, who left Kansas and went to Tanzania, fleeing alongside her husband, Pete O'Neill, and her political partner, and built a life in Tanzania that was deeply rooted in the Panthers' political legacy. So literally, they transplanted the community programs and they adapted it to the needs of the local community and created that in what is now called the United African American Community Center. So it includes a children's home, it includes all sorts of free workshops, it has a strong arts focus and music. It's a real way for the Panthers' legacy to continue. And if you visit there, you go there and there are beautiful murals of, you know, Black Panthers and, you know, Malcolm X and others. And it's a real, again, thinking about, well, what does solidarity mean? We think of it so abstractly, like I'm in solidarity, you know, as if it's a shift in your heart, and it is, but it's also material acts like that, like travel, like language, like reading, like building community, right? All of the communities where the US is enmeshed in imperialist action, though they're representative of those communities within the United States, right? So I think the Panthers did that. They connected themselves to locals. They were very sort of hyper local about it, connecting themselves to people on the ground as well as internationally. Of course, they had an international section in Algeria where they were able to meet with liberation movements, representatives from liberation movements from all over the world. So that was really central.
So for many reasons, such as anti-Blackness, misogyny, and transphobia, archives and histories on and about Black people tend to be revisionist. And this, of course, depends on the perspectives and people who write them. However, there are now several activists and educators, such as Christina Vest, the creator behind the Women of the Black Panther Party mural, who are challenging these revisionist histories. How do you see your work and your forthcoming biographies on Dr. Angela Davis and Patricia Robinson as radical interventions to Black archives?
That's an excellent question. First, I have to thank Dr. Swift for her amazing work, highlighting all of the amazing archival projects that are going on in community. Right? I think archiving is, of course, a profession. It's a professionalized skill. There are degrees, you know, there's a educational path. But on the other hand, you know, if you look at things like house museums, if you look at the collecting practices that people have instituted in their, you know, in their personal and private worlds, it becomes very clear that, you know, archives are not, I mean, they're not just only an elite institution, right? The archives can be freeing, right? Archives could be for the people, by the people. And so one of the exciting things with the history of the Panthers is that there are many attempts by Panthers to archive their own history. And because of the internet, you can put that online. I want to call out It's About Time, BPP.com, which is a wonderful archive, which puts a small percentage of its material online. And I know that he gets calls from like high school students and college students, Billy X. Jennings, who's the lead archivist, and he's educating people with sources that may not be available or may not be curated in a way that is accessible to young people who want to know this history, who maybe can't find that book, but can go on the internet and see the sources or want to speak to someone. There's great archives like that. There's the BPP Alumni Committee, which also puts out really great things. They do the Panther Film Festival annually, again, using visual image to really highlight. There's always great connections with featuring women within those archives and within those film efforts. So, I mean, I think archives are an exciting way of breaking down the barriers, of bringing that history closer and closer to the public where they can see it. I think that's the key. I think the Panthers, again, with their educational focus, they talked a lot about representation. And hang on for one moment, my light died, or I think I had a power surge there. Okay. So the Panthers were very, very key in that way. And they really, I think, were at the forefront of preserving their own history. And today you can do things like read the Panther newspapers online, and you can search and find many articles and essays about Panther women. And I want to shout out the Intersectional Black Panther Party History Project, whose work was really, really central in sort of collating the material that was already there. And of course, we have the mural, right? So important for people to be able to see, right? And I love murals because you're not necessarily looking when you see them, right? You just encounter them, and then they pique your curiosity. So I'm excited about that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Karla. Thank you, Dr. Spencer, for sharing that. Oh, I'm sorry, Luc, did you want me to show the clip first and then you can ask the last question?
Yeah, go ahead. I think
okay, cool. That's
I'm excited to take a clip too.
I know, I think that's the perfect segue to talk about the mural. And Karla mentioned it briefly earlier, but Jill Christina Vest is the brainchild behind the mural of the Black Panther Party, Women of the Black Panther Party. It's the first ever mural of or honoring the women of the Black Panther Party in Oakland. It's on the side of her house, her Oakland home. And so we're gonna watch a clip really quickly, probably about like 10 minutes, maybe 5 to 7 minutes, I should say, of the documentary that was made about the women of the Black Panther Party mural. So I'm gonna share my screen. Oh, Luc, do you mind allowing me to share my screen?
Yeah, hold on one second. Yeah, where is it? Oh, it's not letting me. Oh, I gotta close that. There we go. Let me go.
Oh, thank you. Okay, we're about to get this started if it will allow me to do this. 1 second. Okay. Bear with us, y'all. We're trying to make sure we get this all together. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right, and I'm about to play it.
I think that we live in direct relation to the heroes and sheroes we have. And sometime at some place inside our hearts, we've got to say thank you. So, honor them, and in honoring them, I honor all our ancestors who tried to stay alive and be somebody so that we could be here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jaimee Swift, and I'm the executive director and creator of Black Women Radicals, a Black feminist advocacy organization dedicated to uplifting and centering Black women and gender-expansive people's radical activism in Africa and in the African diaspora. I'm really excited to be the host of the highly anticipated reveal of the Women of the Black Panther Party mural, the first ever public art installation dedicated to the women of the Black Panther Party. The mural is the brainchild of Jill Christina Vest, an activist and a longstanding resident of Oakland, California. Jill Christina was inspired by the powerful artwork that emerged during the uprisings for Black life last year. However, Jill Christina noticed how Black women and girls during the protests and even beyond the protests have been overlooked and sidelined in political discourses. And so in true Black woman radical fashion, she decided to do something about it. A community-driven project, the mural of the women of the Black Panther Party will be forever located on Jill Christina's house, where people can look at and learn about the over 250 names of Black women who fought for the oppressed. The mural is the most comprehensive collection of names celebrating the women of the Black Panther Party in existence. The mural is also dedicated to the Say Her Name movement, a campaign launched by the African American Policy Forum and the Center for Intersectionality and Social Policy Studies that centers the names and lives of Black women and girls who are victims and survivors of gender anti-Black police violence. Now we will hear from Jill Christina Vest and why she started the mural.
I was born in 1966, which is, as many people know, the same year that the Black Panther Party was also born. And I wanted to have that connection pretty early on because I've always been a fighter. I've always been a justice warrior. And the Black Panther Party was something that resonated with me very deeply and immediately, and that I saw these people doing something very concrete about the immediate situation in front of them. I was politicized at San Francisco State when I was there just as an observer, and I had Angela Davis as a professor. Because of her, I enrolled the next semester and continued to take classes with her. And Donna Hubbard and Johnetta Richards and Laura Head and China Soleil and, you know, all of these amazing Black women that were there to activate all of these baby Black women. Like, it was their mission to teach us what we needed to do and what we needed to know in order for us to stand strong and feel proud of the ancestors that we come from. When I got to West Oakland, I fell in love. And what I like to say is I was born and raised in Chicago, but I grew up in Oakland. The vibe of West Oakland and the vibe of Oakland is as big as it is. There's never the loss of this feeling of community here, because when you are around and about Oakland, you run into people that you know, you run into people's families. You saw somebody at the barbecue last week, and that feeling of love and that feeling of recognition and the pride of Oaklanders, like the fierce, fierce pride of Oaklanders, is really powerful. So this mural came into my mind and became a vision in end of May, beginning of June of 2020. And I just remember being in my house and I was pacing and I had a lot of anxiety and I was despondent about the state of America. And is this ever going to end? Are they going to keep killing us in the street? What is it that we can do to stop this? And out of that, I decided that the only thing that was going to counteract my despondency was joy. something that was giving me joy in those times of May and June 2020 in Oakland were the beautiful murals that were going up. And, you know, on one day at the end of May, I took a walk where I just walked the length of Broadway on my way home. I got a little bit upset thinking, oh, but they're just plywood over windows and they're going to get taken down and they're going to be destroyed. And I was like, I'm putting a mural on my house. And I ran outside and I started taking pictures of this one little wall where I thought the mural was going to be. And that's how it began. The rebellion of 2020, that had never happened before. There were that many cities, that many states, and that many countries were rebelling over a 24-hour period of time. So it was really historic. It was really powerful what was happening. The mural then became a part of the fact that they weren't talking about Breonna Taylor to the extent that they were talking about George Floyd. We know this woman was murdered in her sleep, but nobody took to the streets for her.
Breonna Taylor's life mattered. Say her name.
So all that delves into the Say Her Name movement that was born out of Sandra Bland, that when she was assassinated, murdered, killed in Texas, it was quiet until a group of women rose up and said, no, we're going to take to the streets for Black women. So when she passed, I had a fierce reaction to that as well, because she was a justice warrior. She was very outspoken. She loved and adored and wanted the freedom of Black people. And she was very clear and articulate that that's what she wanted. That's what I want. That's what the Black Panthers wanted. And when I created that connection of Black women being invisible, Black women fighting for Black people, then it all just kind of fell into place. And wait a minute, you don't ever hear about the women of the Black Panther Party. So why not make a mural about the women of the Black Panther Party, who are clearly the most unseen, unrecognized, unnamed, and unhonored fierce warriors of that time. And their history is our history, and their history will bring us joy. I wanted to find a way at all over these years to thank my community that helped me, thank my neighbors that helped me, to thank the city of Oakland for being the birthplace of the Black Panther Party, and most specifically send a thank you to the women of the Black Panther Party. All of that in addition to changing this tired trope about West Oakland. Are you going to remember the history of gun violence and drugs? Where'd those drugs come from? Where'd those guns come from? That's a different documentary. However, there's so many other things in West Oakland to celebrate. And if we don't celebrate them, who will? It's like the Panthers said, if they're not going to feed these children, we will feed them. If they're not going to put shoes on their feet, we will put shoes on their feet. If they're not going to educate them, we'll open our own school. So this is very much in that line of, we need to honor our heroes. If I can remind myself that I come from women like Joan Kelly and Erica Huggins and Cheryl Dawson and Asali Gale Dixon, I come from them. They are my elders. Their stories informed my life. I am fierce because they are fierce. Everybody should know that. And if any little Black girl or any Black woman walks up to this mural and looks up at these 40-foot tall Black women from the Panther Party, and their shoulders go back a little bit, their spine straightens a little bit, maybe they get a little smirk on their face like, that's my auntie, or that's my neighbor, or that's my grandmother, or that could be me. I don't care if anything else happens with the mural. As long as that happens, I will have succeeded in the original vision that I had, because I want the mural to bring joy and to bring pride and to bring connection and to remind us we have freedom fighters fighting for us all the time. And we too can be freedom fighters. They just saw a need and they fixed it. And that's the true definition of a revolutionary as far as I'm concerned.
Hi, y'all. I could watch the film the whole entire time, and you actually can watch the full film. I'm gonna drop the link right here, but that was a mini documentary about the women of the Black Panther Party mural. And I also want to share with everyone the full link the link to the Women of the Black Panther Party mural project. And you can see the mural, it's still being worked on. You can actually purchase, shop and have, purchase t-shirts. And also they have a museum as well of the Women of the Black Panther Party in Oakland. So just sharing that with everyone.
Thank you. And watch that documentary, 500 views. It should be a few other zeros on there.
For sure.
Yes.
Yeah, that was really, really powerful. I'm over here all emotional. I'm about to shed a tear. Thanks for sharing that, Jaimee. So one last question, Dr. Spencer, and then we'll pass it over to the audience to answer some of the questions. Is what are your hopes for the future of Black power and Black radical movements, movement building? Excuse me. Do you feel like the Black Panther Party point or 10-point plan, are they still relevant to that future, or what things can we maybe take from that to start or try to continue that legacy?
Great question. And, I just came back from a trip to LA last week, and I was overwhelmed with the houselessness that was everywhere you could turn your eye. And I'm a New Yorker, so we see the suffering and the result of, of the policies that leave people without homes. And, I'm oftentimes in my head, you can almost chant the Black Panther Party's 10-point platform and program. I mean, there's one about housing. We want decent housing fit for the shelter of human beings. That's point number 4. We want education for our people that exposes the nature of this decadent society, American society. That's point number 5. 7, of course, we want an immediate end to police brutality and murder of Black people. Point number 7. So I think that what I love about the Panthers 10-point platform and program, and there are different versions of this as they evolve over time. But what I like about it is that it reminds us, it brings us back down to the bread and butter issues. I think sometimes when people think of radical politics, they're thinking about like what set of ideas, which theorists can we emulate or articulate. But the Panthers 10-point platform or program brings you back to people need shelter, they need to eat, they need, to live, they need self-determination, they need freedom. And the message was clear. And I think that's why the 10-point platform program has stood the test of time. It talks about self-determination as well. And I think that those concepts are so critical. And those concepts are rallying points, I think, at times where it feels like, movements are seeking different directions, right? I'm seeking the direction that's going to get the people off of the streets. I believe that there's enough wealth to accomplish that. I'm seeking better education for the schools. I'm challenging the way that some students are taught in environments that are, antithetical to learning, to safety, to human sustenance. And so the Black Panther Party's 10-point platform program is definitely something I think that continues to be relevant. There's so many other tracks, I think, of that radical movements and organizations created in the 20th century that can keep the wind to the back of today's activists as they figure out the way forward. I think sometimes that people look to 60s organization almost as a blueprint. And I don't think it should be a blueprint. Times have changed. You know, I'm a historian. I love to have my one foot in the past and glance in the rear view mirror, but I also know that's not the way ahead. I think about the visibility and support for gender expansiveness, for queer activism and leaders that was not articulated in the same way in the 1960s. I think about the role of technology and how we could use the potential of technology to do that travel that we, you know, in the past, people had to hop on planes to communicate with a movement in, let's say, the Philippines or wherever it is that you're seeking to, you know, stoke the revolutionary fires. And now there's more opportunities to do so. At the same time, there's a continuation of political repression. And there's certainly lessons from the past about the persistence and the reproduction of state violence as a way of hampering the potential of social movements. And I think that's important to note, because oftentimes we focus on the social movement shortcomings and things like that. But when we think about the larger context, it's important to kind of put all of that together in order to figure out which way forward. So yeah, I think the Panthers continue to be relevant, the 10-point platform and program. Everyone should know parts of it by heart. If you don't, there's also many, like I said, programs. There's the Recharge Genocide. There's, you know, the March on Washington movement. There's lots of political tracks, I think, for us to draw upon. But when we think about the Panthers in particular, even though gender is not mentioned in the 10-point platform and program, it's important to think about just the women's work and the women's ideas that are embedded in how we think about the Panthers. Because sometimes I feel like it's a distinction. People are happy to hear about, you know, women who were Panthers, but when they think about what the Panthers did, or somehow when they're imagining it or drawing it or drawn to pictures of it, those pictures tend to be of men, and not only men, but men doing very one-dimensional things, marching in uniform and stuff like that. When there's so much evidence for so much more, you know, registering people to vote, sickle cell anemia tests, political education classes. The Panthers were really multifaceted in what they did and how they lived. And I would love that to be part of their legacy that gets brought forward today.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm sorry, Luc, go ahead.
Nah, I mean, that was really powerful because it's so true. There's always a militant piece that's always kind of concentrated on, but there's so much more, like the breakfast programs, all of that. So thank you, Dr. Spencer.
Yes, and I love saying that, you know, the breakfast program is like one thing to fight back against, you know, the state in the bodies of, you know, police officers or FBI agents who are infiltrating, harassing, arresting. But it's another thing to actually fight off hunger, right? It's a whole other thing.
Thank
Jaimee,
you so much, Dr. Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Spencer, for this conversation. We really appreciate it. Karla, did you have anything you would like to say before we hop into the Q&A section of the conversation?
No, there's a question that someone asked in the Q&A that I'm really interested to hear the answer to.
Yes, I saw that. And I think we're on the same page, Karla. So we're at the Q&A section of the discussion. Just want to thank Dr. Spencer again for your you're just overwhelming me with so much knowledge in such a great way. I'm over here like taking notes like I'm in class. This is a class for me. So I appreciate you so much. We all appreciate you so much. But Brianna asked a really important question. Brianna asks, I'm not sure if this was mentioned, but I would love to hear how colorism impacted the retelling / history of this revolutionary party. There were so many dark-skinned women that were integral to this movement, but when we recall Black women's leadership in the party, the voices that are centered seem to primarily be the light-skinned women within and affiliated with the party.
Thank you for that question. That is so true. I think that what I'll say is that colorism was very real in the 1960s. Black is beautiful on the one hand. Let's embrace our, our hair in its natural state. On the other hand, it was very hard to uproot the brainwashing around beauty standards that was so commonplace. Now, this did happen in the 60s. You have so many, you have the Grandassa models, you have the ways that natural hair became more visible, more centralized, etc. So you definitely had, a really strong Black is Beautiful movement, but was it strong enough to uproot what had been implanted for so many centuries, right? That is the question. So yes, because we have a narrow definition of leadership, we tend to only look at either the women who had titles within the organization or who were connected to important men. Now, those women on their own right deserve the mantle of leadership for sure. But alongside those smaller few women, as you mentioned, there's tons of other Panther women. One of the things I would love to see is more of a focus on different elements of life within the organization. Because one of the realities is that life within the organization mirrored life within the US. So hierarchies of color and size and hair, texture, whose Afro looked one way or the other. I one time heard Erica Huggins talk about how soft her Afro was because her hair was so loosely curled, and how it wouldn't, it didn't stand up in those same ways as some other women. So even the debates around hair texture, I think sometimes people feel like those are not political questions, right? That's like when we're talking about the Black Panther Party, I want to hear about self-defense. I don't want to hear about people's, opinion on makeup, or, why is it that the people that were exalted as beautiful, strong leaders all fit the same physical profile in some ways. And I think that, that does have to be part of the conversation then and now, right? There were certainly many Panther women who came in all hues, but we tend to only focus on a few of them, right? Elaine Brown, well, she was the national, she went into national leadership, right? Kathleen Cleaver, for sure, and others that come to mind. But I think it's part of it is an actual reality of colorism. I think part of it is continuing to focus on a narrow set of people as representative of Panther women, right? I think we have to sort of break out against that. I think in some ways, when we're trying to diversify who we're talking about, we'll bring in other folks, but then those folks become exemplary, and they take, they in a way are used to flatten any complexity, whether it's Fannie Lou Hamer as the rural sharecropper, or we don't know the names of all of the other women who were rural sharecroppers, or whether it's other people in the organization. So I hope that was helpful. I would love to see more work on that. There were definitely different ideals about beauty at the time, and they varied, they varied in terms of what was exalted and desired. And I think it's a great question because the Panthers were right smack in the middle of that, late teen, early 20s, social revolution, where people are, they're out of their parent, they have more personal freedom, and are experimenting with all sorts of things.
amazing. That's true. That now that you mention it, I never really thought about it, but it is really more of the light-skinned women of the Black Panther Party that you're really familiar with. When I think
Or they're the
about
ones who are also seen as beautiful. And I think that beauty and attractiveness was used in interesting ways. I mean, they were young people. So yeah, when they were out there passing the flyers and stuff, there were definitely people who connected socially, you know, through movement, or were brought into the movement because of a, hey, I'll come down to that party or to that registration booth because, you know, you look good. And that was real. You know, the Panthers were just ordinary people with all of the same, you know, ideals embedded in them around attractiveness and all of that. So yeah, you definitely see that.
Yeah, these are college kids that we're talking about. So another question here, Dr. Spencer, is how does everyday non-academic begin to implement the ideals of the Black Panther Party? How do we not give up hope? Is the question.
Great question. I always say the one thing that the Panthers kind of make evident is that it only takes, like Huey Newton and Bobby Seale were friends. They went to community college together. They went through different organizations together. And when they felt like those organizations weren't serving them, they tried to create their own organization by going around with this sheet of paper with 10 points, trying to get people to join the organization. And initially the people that joined were the people they knew from around the way, their friends. Two brothers joined initially, right? So this is to say, all you need is your small community. Right? You can speak to 2 people, whether they be your family members or your friends. You can come together and you can probably put together enough of a curriculum, quote unquote, or an event for the young people in your neighborhood, right? I feel like this is a time where people need to embrace innovation and think about education and political education as a part of mutual aid. And imagine that small little acts like that can make a difference. Do a presentation at your next family gathering, right? Share the knowledge, and then connect what you're doing on that level to an organization that is doing even more, right? Or an organization that has deep local roots or nationwide roots, so that your work within your family, within your community, can be supported by your connection to movements that are going to raise larger questions of ideology and organization and things like that. There's so much political education available today. There's so much possibility for an ordinary person to gain enough skills to have a podcast or to put something out on YouTube, or to, you know, let's not get into social media. You can do that. I mean, I feel like there's so many people who are using their platforms, quote unquote, or their brands, quote unquote, for, you know, all sorts of purposes, but those same platforms could be used as an educational tool, even an anti-capitalist tool. I love book clubs. There's so many book clubs that got started during this pandemic. Black women have been at the forefront of those book clubs. Get together your friends and read some stuff and talk about it, and then do something, you know, do something about it. Not like in a volunteer framework, but in a transformative politic framework.
So, sorry. This question was asked. I've also understood from minimal research that the Black Panther Party was often very unwelcoming to women in leadership. Mm-hmm. Is that the case, or is this an attempt to discredit the work that was done between the genders in the Black Panther Party?
Thank you for asking that. Excellent question. It would depend on where. You know, the reality is that the Black Panthers were rooted in the same society that had specific roles for men, specific roles for women. Not only that, as a Black organization, they were coming out at a time where the idea of the Black man being held down, being infantilized, being kept out of the role as the quote unquote head of the family, and that racism had destroyed the Black family. That's the context of the Black Panther. So of course, yes, when women and men joined the organization together, there were definitely conflicts around who had authority, who had the power to close down a meeting. If we were having a really great political discussion and it went on for like 6-7 hours and hunger was to be had, who was going to be leaving that important meeting and address that hunger, right? On a real level, the Panthers dealt with like that, and question of like male dominance and female subordination. And that played out differently in different places, depending on the chapters. There are horrible stories of women who were sexually assaulted as part of their experience of the Black Panther Party. This is not, there's no way around that. That is the truth. That happened. But we can also say that that happened. That was the experiences of women in many organizations at the time, which is unfortunate, right? We don't ask these questions of Martin Luther King's Southern Christian Leadership Conference because we think, oh, it's ministers, right? But we should know that the church is a patriarchal institution, definitely had that stifling effect on women's leadership. So women throughout the 60s were struggling for voice in so many different arenas. So that meant that a group like the Panthers, even though they had those embedded attitudes, they might be relatively freer. You might join the Black Panthers and feel like I can struggle here. I believe 80% of this, and I'm going to struggle to get the 20%, on my side, or, I'm going to work with male allies. And it wasn't so simple oftentimes, women and men on different sides. You had their patriarchal women, as we should know, right? So, or women who support patriarchy, we should say. So it's a mixed response. Yes, there were definitely Panther chapters that were notorious for disavowing, not disavowing, but just, because I think nothing is ever policy, right? It's always that unstated transcript, that hidden transcript. It's always like, come on in, sister, right? But then when you get in, what you're expected to do or what your potential is, right? Where can you grow? I feature a woman in the book who started out typing, and she said, I was happy to type. I wanted to contribute. I have nothing, I'll do the clerical work, but I didn't only want to do clerical work. I didn't want to be stuck there, right? This is not the only thing I've got to contribute. I can do other things. And that's how people felt even about the cooking. Like, okay, I got cooking skills. I can do some of that cooking, but I'm not going to only be cooking, and you're going to learn to cook too. And, we're going to those roles, everything from childcare to meal production, to all of that. The idea wasn't the purview of any individual, but could be something that would be a valued contribution to the movement. And we see that, like, now there's really great books talking about like the role of women who cooked for those civil rights demonstrators, how they kept them going. And oftentimes when you see, if you want to do something, you see people protesting, help them get food, help them get water. Like, you can be part of that support system. If you feel like your body can't be on the line at that moment, you can be part of the infrastructure that, helps people to survive. And that is oftentimes, the work that women did in the Black Panther Party. That was also something that women did. It was not the only thing they did. It wasn't exclusive or anything like that. But there were definitely struggles around what we could call sort of the women's role in the struggle.
Thank you.
That was a part of the book that mentioned a lot of that talked about how the women made all the food, and then these dudes are just gonna go and eat all the food. And I forget the brother's name that had to say, like, we not about to eat all the food and not let the women that cook the food eat. Like, what's wrong with you? So it's I'll say it's disappointing, really, to hear that these type of things were happening, because it's like, who raised you? You know what I mean?
I know, but there's
But,
such a complex, dynamic. And I think, we see it in our political movements, but we also, I think, we see it in the mirror, right? All the debates, who's getting whose plate at the barbecue and who should be cooking what. I mean, it's a complex thing because sometimes those acts of service are acts of love and acts of selflessness, but sometimes, it's an act of oppression to expect, that those kinds of things to be done involuntarily sometimes. So.
right.
Thank you so much, Dr. Spencer. And I did an interview with Miss Erica Huggins, and she was talking about that too. And I know you talk about her in the book, and like, I don't know if it was her that gave you like a blanket when y'all were walking together. In your introduction, you talk about that, but I remember, I don't know, I remember that little tidbit because she just seems like that type of person. But she was definitely talking about.
It was a scarf.
It was a scarf. That's right. That's right. Yes. She just seems like that type of person. But going into like, that's a great segue, your response to this other question, which is, how should Black communities now work towards minimizing and eradicating misogynoir and sexism in general, but specifically when it comes to movements towards liberation?
This is a very key question because first thing is to acknowledge that sexism, misogynoir is a political misstep in movements. Oftentimes it's treated as something that's attached to particular individuals' behaviors or something like that. But we have to understand it as a paralysis of analysis, right? It's about how we think politically about human potential. It's about self-determination, which was in point number 1 and point number 2 of the Black Panther Party's program. And I always say that if one person's liberation is dependent on someone else's subordination, then how free are we going to be? And I think that continuing to bring it up and ensuring that it is seen as a legitimate issue within movements is key. To support the people who speak out against the conditions they face in movements is also key. It's an uphill battle, as you know, just from any glance at the news and how abusers are oftentimes shielded, especially if they can also be seen as a victim of racism. But we know that victims of racism can still perpetuate harm against other people, right? Women and children even. So it's really key, I think, to make this central in movements. I think that if you're in an organization, they should have some kind of statement around sexism and misogyny, not for lip service, as all of those statements came out after the uprising of 2020, proclaiming that we don't tolerate X, Y, and Z. No, it should be based on really true, deep political struggle, reading, right? There's lots of readings that have been put out about the detrimental impact of sexism, the relationship between sexism and colonialism and imperialism and hierarchies and all of that, that there should be reading that comes out as a prelude to a statement. Whatever organization you're in should have that kind of statement. That's one small thing that can be done, that can be implemented immediately. The second thing is, of course, your actions with the children in your life and making sure that they see another type of world where people are not dehumanized or taught to value only their physical elements as versus their intellectual and their mental and spiritual beings as well. And again, I think making that connection to structural and institutionalized systemic racism, imperialism, capitalism, to think about how sexism plays a role in limiting the capacity and the potential of women and also, you know, the types of harm that women face. It's a long thing, and other survivors, I should say. It's really about power and how it operates, because, you know, abusers and survivors are not always in particular rigid, uh, you know, gender roles or anything like that. So I think it's a wide scale thing. It's almost like putting on a different set of glasses and always being on point with that. Just the way you wouldn't sit through a racist joke, you shouldn't sit through a sexist joke. You know, just the way that you would call someone out on something, you should definitely do that. And then you should be calling out systems, um, not just individuals in our life. Start there, but also move on to calling out systems. Um, that whatever system you find yourself in, whether it be academia, whether it be corporate, you know, corporate America, whether it be the movement spaces that we work so hard to be uh, freeing for people. It's not freeing for people if it's not freeing for everyone, right? And this also includes, you know, people of, you know, all identifications as well.
That's powerful. That's very true. So we have our last question here, Dr. Spencer.
Mhm.
I'm gonna have to breathe and read it here. It says, I'm currently an graduate researching women in the Black Panther Party for my Africana Studies honors thesis, and have been particularly interested in the relationships that women in the party cultivated amongst themselves as a way to support one another against experiences of sexism in the party and expand visions of liberation to include the needs of Black women. Elaine Brown's description of clique, Shakura's relationship with women in BLA, etc. Has your research illuminated any insights about the way that women developed and relied on networks of support amongst themselves?
Oh, excellent question. I mean, I have found that community sustained people. And I think that's key, because there were times where being part of the Panthers, like any political organization, was challenging, whether it be the arrests, whether it be the years and years and years of living in the economic margins sometimes, whether it be disappointment in the actions of leadership, those types of things. But what sustained people oftentimes was their relationship to each other. This is deeply political. No one wants to, well, few people want to acknowledge this. You know, they assume, well, if you put together an organization, what we have, we need the right ideas to go forward. No, you need to treat people need to feel valued. They need to feel connected to each other. And women in particular, I mean, this is a time of sort of consciousness raising groups in the women's movement. And although the Panthers didn't have any such thing, they definitely had comradeship, right? They definitely had ways for people to support each other and acknowledge that they were part of a larger political mission, right? Comrades were not always friends, right? But it was someone that you could trust because you were both equally committed to this larger goal. And so I talk about comradeship in my book and the role that it played in sustaining people. It meant that you could feel comfortable going from Oakland to Chicago to New York, back to North Carolina, feeling like people that you've never met have your back, right, in a particular way, or share your ideas, or are working towards the same goals. And Panther women in particular, I think, were able to build that bond sometimes, right? It wasn't, you know, ideal or idealistic all the time. There was definitely conflict between people who were women in the Black Panther Party, for sure. But Kathleen Cleaver told me that she started having these retreats for Panther women in the early 2000s, I want to say, late 1990s, early 2000s, where it allowed for Panther women to come together and heal, to have those conversations that they were not able to have in the flush of youth, or because they were trying to survive and and things like that, and to sort of re-examine who they were and who they are now. And so I think that those connections between the women have kept them going. And, you know, you see that in the same similar way, even I would say between women and men, and, you know, amongst men as well. Every year there's a Black Panther Party reunion conference. It's a place for people to get together and see their, you know, beloved comrades. It's also a place for people, for them to continue to publicize the political commitments that they do have around political prisoners, around, you know, poverty, eradicating poverty and things like that. That I think speaks to the bond that people have. I mean, when you get around people who were in the Black Panther Party, they, you know, you can feel the connection. It's not always love, right? But you feel that it's like family. Family's not always, you know, harmonious places, but you can feel when you're in that context, when you're in family. And you feel that in the Black Panthers. And I think the women were able in particular to cultivate that.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Dr. Spencer.
It's a great question to end on.
I know. Wow, that was like right on time too. Bam, 8 o'clock. Listen. Listen. Oh my goodness. But once again, I just want to say thank you, Dr. Spencer, for your just who you are and for your amazing work. And we appreciate you so much. Honestly, this book is a major critical intervention, and I thank you so much for writing it. I want to say thank you to Luc for just the amazing work you're doing with Abantu audio, and like just so excited about what is to come, and excited that we're, you know, comrades in the struggle with this, you know what I mean? And then Karla, I just want to say thank you for your brilliance and your writing, and just looking forward to seeing more what, you know, what you have in store, because there's a lot of great things in store. But make sure you go to Abantu Audio and listen to the audiobook and just support.
Yes, the audiobook. Thank you again.
And support Abantu Audio.
Yes, thank you again for the audiobook. I think it will bring it to a whole new audience. Put on that audiobook while you're driving somewhere, while you're washing dishes, while you're, you know, play it for your reading group that I inspired you to create just now. You know, bring a kid in your life and have them listen to parts of it, and more. I mean, the catalog that they're developing is quite amazing. So subscribe.
Thank you, Dr. Spencer, and thank you, everybody that was a part of this call, all the attendees. Definitely tap into everything that Dr. Spencer is doing. Jaimee, if you don't mind dropping a link where they can find Dr. Spencer, or Dr. Spencer, if you have a link where people can reach out to you for any information. I felt like I was in a classroom right now. I was like, man, look at me getting my PhD over here, okay? But I appreciate it all. Jaimee, of course, the amazing work that you all are doing with Black Women Radicals, and I'm looking forward to this Black Power movement continuing, and hopefully continuing that legacy that the Black Panthers established for us long ago. So thank you, everybody, and thank you all the attendees.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Karla,
Thank you so much. Thank you for hosting me. Thank you for coming out.
Yes.
Yeah,
Awesome.
thank you so much for putting this together.
Awesome. Yeah, there's going to be definitely more. So, I mean, tune in on Instagram, social media. We're going to be blasting more. So, I mean, just tap in, please.
Yes, thank you so much again. I'm just saying thank you to everybody. Like, you know, the cat, I mean, trying to, you know, type really fast, but thank you all so much. And we'll be doing this again. So see everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.